Hi, I'm Rebecca Thomas, health correspondent for The Independent. We asked you your questions about the junior doctors' strike. Let's see what you asked. Now for our first question. Junior doctors are going on strike and asking for a 35% pay rise from the government. Why are they asking for this and what does it mean? You're right, 35% pay rise, when you first hear it, does seem like an eye-watering amount. But what is this request really and why are they asking for it? The BMA have asked for this essentially because they are asking the government to address a 26% real terms pay cut. The BMA have calculated this based on RPI and inflation. So based on their calculations, junior doctors today are earning 26% less than they were in 2008. And in order to restore pay levels, the BMA are saying the government would need to agree to a 35% pay rise this year. And now for our next question. How many trainees going to work today will strike because they want more money before they qualify on a $100,000 per year wage? Lots of trainees will be lucky to qualify and get wages junior doctors are on whilst training. And is it money grabbing? It's important to acknowledge first the amount of debt your average junior doctor will be in after the year's worth of medical school. So they are starting in arguably a different position to other trainees and graduates. But I think more importantly, this strike is more than just about pay levels, more than just about junior doctors wanting more money. It's largely a lot of it is stemmed from frustration with work, frustration with working conditions, and that largely stems from retention. So failing to retain doctors means you have a more stretched workforce, meaning you have a worse working environment. And of course, retention, one of the most important aspects of that is pay. And so rather than thinking about this as money grabbing, junior doctors are approaching this as pay as an incentive to actually stay and work within the health service. Now our third reader is asked, I pay my cleaners £17 per hour. A plumber charges £50 to £75 per hour. We expect junior doctors to save our lives for £14 per hour. The government have found billions of money for useless PPE, but you can't pay doctors a fair salary. Completely understandable question. Why can't we pay junior doctors a fair salary when there is so much waste in our system? We'll start with the £14 per hour. That figure, which has been floated by the BMA, been reported widely, isn't entirely accurate. That's £14 per hour for a basic salary for a nearly newly qualified junior doctors. So junior doctors they're a broad range and can be doctors with 8 years worth of experience. So their salary, for intents and purposes, could be a lot more than £14 per hour. But the point remains is, what are we paying junior doctors a fair salary? And of course, junior doctors in the unions would argue, no, we're not based on the hours they do, not based on how vital their jobs are to the running of the health service. And you'll see from the headlines so far how vital they are to the running of a hospital, for example. Our healthcare leaders have been very worried about this strike purely because how much a hospital relies on a junior doctor. So avoiding debates on how you place value on that, I think it's important. These strikes have raised an important question over how much we value our public sector workers. I might be wrong, but aren't junior doctors paid by the NHS? So should their anger not be directed at the bloated levels of management and how they're spending the largest budget in the history of the health service? Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. And we often do see headlines on the bloated salaries of the NHS management, fat cat salaries of those sitting in a boardroom. And largely, I think these headlines are quite misleading. The actual budget spent on NHS management is relatively small. And if you actually talk to those working in the healthcare system, those at the front line and those managing a service, having people who know how to run a service operationally are really important. They're vital cogs in the running of our entire health system. So that's so the argument that we're spending too much money on management is actually quite misleading, and it distracts from the conversation. A lot of people who peddle that headline aren't actually thinking or commenting on the running of the NHS as a machine. This is one of the biggest organisations in Europe. I think it's the largest employer in Europe, and an organisation of that size does need management. Now for our final question. What other option are junior doctors left with? Thousands are already leaving the NHS. That's our only alternative. Steve Barclay doesn't have to let the strike go ahead. Any credible offer would see the BMA returned to the negotiating table. That's a really important question to end on, and I think from this reader that clearly displays the frustration that we're seeing across the junior doctor workforce. This is a situation that has been building for years. It's not happened overnight. It's not happened just because of COVID. It is a combination of years of understaffing, worsening working conditions, and so we really have come to a point where they're that frustrated, and many junior doctors will be aware of the impact and the disruption these strikes are causing and not be happy with that, but they've come to a situation where they don't see another way out, and that's really important for us to take on and understand. Whether the government will respond to that frustration, I mean, the rhetoric so far really has been worsening. It's gotten more acrimonious than it has. I think there are a lot of people who would argue that the strategy, the way this has played out, isn't working for the government any longer. There was a clear strategy to wait out the strikes, particularly with the nurses and particularly with the paramedics. That ended up in a deal which many would argue is questionable. I mean, it's a pay rise, but then they have agreed to a below inflation pay rise for nurses and paramedics effectively. But the strategy of waiting these junior doctor strikes out, I think, is getting more and more unpalatable for the public and for the health service. You really got to a situation where the health service can no longer absorb the shock of these strikes. Thank you for all your questions. Make sure you keep up to date with all the latest health news on The Independent and Independent TV. We'll see you next time on You Ask the Question.